Roar!
Ew.
Hello and welcome to Midnight Readings. Today we will be reading Starlight's Lesson, written by James Powell. Apologies if I butchered that. Hope you all enjoy. So, here I am. Starlight wanted to sound confident, and to feel it as well. Yet being here, finally taking on this role, was enough to sap the courage of even the most self-assured of ponies. Here she stood, as head mare of Princess Twilight's school. It was a tremendous responsibility, and she knew it. Her mentor had created a legacy with this place, and that legacy was now to be continued under her tenure. The mare wondered silently if this was what Twilight herself felt when she finally assumed leadership of the nation. Then she chuckled, knowing full well it probably was. Nervousness gnawed at her with every step that she took down the hallways, and though many of the students who passed her gave her smiles and nods and all the usual marks of respect owed to one in her position, even this was not enough to alleviate the way she felt. Starlight Glimmer was no stranger to poor choices after all, and this was one place where she was adamant that she would make no more. Looking ahead, she could already see her two friends, Sunburst and Trixie, standing just outside a classroom and talking with each other, and she gulped. I guess we might as well get started. And don't worry, I'm sure you'll do wonderfully. Starlight's eyes widened and she spun in place, just to see the smiling face of one who was very dear to her. Twilight? The new ruler of Equestria giggled. You didn't think I'd stay away from the very first day of this school with you, as it said, did you? The presence of her friend was a big weight off Starlight's mind, and she moved forward, embracing her royal companion in a hug, which Twilight naturally returned. When they parted, however, Starlight once more started to look worried. Everything's in place. The paperwork, the schedules, the classroom seating arrangements, the details are all sorted. Twilight nodded. Yet why do I still hear fear in you? Starlight's ears drooped, ever so slightly. You cast a long shadow. Very long shadow, Twilight. Hearing that, the Princess of Friendship sighed. I imagine I do. But if there's one thing I know for certain, it's that no good can ever come from trying to compare yourself and your accomplishments to that of your friends. I may have done many things in my life, but you should never let that daunt you from taking on responsibility yourself. Starlight looked behind her to her other friends, who were still conversing. What we teach here will spread out across Equestria and beyond. One wrong move, one bad lesson, and who knows what damage it could do. Twilight nodded again. You're right, it's a big worry. I had many the same fears when I took this role myself. I'm teaching them well. Am I getting the point across properly? Will any of them care about what I have to say? All these and more are things that you and every other teacher is going to worry about, and not without good reason. Her smile returned. As Starlight turned to look at her again, she placed a hoof upon her shoulder. But you have nothing to worry about, Starlight. I have absolute faith in your ability to do this. Those children couldn't be in better hooves. Taking a deep breath, Starlight exhaled, then smiled to her friend. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Twilight glanced past her. I imagine you'll want to keep an eye on your friend's lessons today? Starlight, at least at first, opened her mouth to speak, but when she took in Twilight's words, she started to look like she was thinking things over more. Twilight noted this, yet said nothing as her former apprentice got her thoughts and words together. Then, after a long pause, the new head mare smiled to her. Actually, I think I've got something else in mind. Twilight was somewhat taken aback by this announcement, but her expression soon turned into a knowing smile. She knew Starlight well, after all, and thus she could sense a good idea when one was brewing. Gesturing to the other end of the hallway, the princess gave a quick bow of her head. In that case, head mare Starlight, don't let me keep you. Starlight returned the bow and turned around to head in that very direction. Twilight followed, allowing her friend to stay ahead, and before long, the two of them were within sight of Trixie and Sunburst, who turned and finally noticed their approach. Ah, I see the great head mare has decided to grace us with her presence, Trixie announced, and not without an eye roll from Starlight soon after. You okay with today, Starlight? I know something like this can be pretty big, Sunburst asked. Starlight looked to him with a soft smile, grateful for his concern. Thanks for asking. But yeah, I'm fine. The stallion, after adjusting his glasses, looked to the 3 mares around him, then to the classroom door. "So, shall we get started?" Starlight raised a hoof, stopping them both. "Actually, there's been a change of plans. I'll be taking the first lesson today." Hearing that, both Trixie and Sunburst looked to her with surprise, while Twilight, who'd perhaps suspected that this would be the way things would go, simply smirked to their reactions. Then, after taking in the surprise for a moment, the other two looked to one another and then smiled, before again regarding their friend. "Well then, don't let us keep you," Trixie remarked. Starlight nodded, then looked to the door of the classroom. This was it, she said to herself. The threshold, no going back after this. Once she got this ball rolling, it would be well and truly real for her. She would be head mare, and while there was probably always going to be some level of nervousness and fear over it, she now had her friends behind her, and that alone gave her the confidence to go ahead with this. So after taking another deep breath, she stepped forward, pushing the door open and entering the classroom. But there was no stereotypical room of chaos beyond that door, with children screaming and otherwise being disruptive. Instead, Starlight entered a room of calm and quiet, where the students were already at their desks, eagerly awaiting their lesson. And they too were surprised when they saw who it was that would be giving them their lesson, though that again turned into happy smiles shortly afterwards. Starlight closed the door behind her and looked to her class in its entirety. "Good morning, class." They all greeted her in one way or another, and then they watched as she got her way over to the desk, sitting down and then making absolutely sure she was comfortable. Starlight looked up to the faces of all her students, young inquiring minds, who were all wondering what they'd be taught. They'd all learned so much during their first year, so what could this new head mare possibly teach them? Something big and fascinating? Something that Twilight herself might never have taught them? These thoughts caused the expected degree of excitement and curiosity in all of them, and Starlight could practically sense it as they looked at her. In a brief moment, she glanced to the side, seeing her 3 friends look through the window of the door. They didn't want to deprive her of this moment, but they were here for support all the same. She smiled to them, then looked again to her students. Taking a calming breath, she finally spoke. "Mistakes." The class fell silent, looking to one another with confusion, and after making sure she had their total attention, Starlight began to explain herself. "It is something we all have to do in our lives. They may come in different forms, and we may not even recognize it at the time that we're making them. But we will make mistakes." She slowly looked down to her desk. "I have made fair share of mistakes, and then some. Mistakes that can never be forgotten. Mistakes that shouldn't be forgotten. Mistakes that for a time made me feel like I was never going to be worthy of having the friends and life that I do." Again, she looked up, seeing her students focus their gaze completely on her. When you make a mistake, something that looks like it will forever mark the relationships you have with others, it can be the most terrible thing in the world to realize. All of a sudden, you're struck with the knowledge that you've done something bad, something unforgivable, something that will perhaps make you feel like you've ruined whatever chance you might have or have had to be with others or to make friends. Seeing the understandably concerned look her students were giving her, Starlight eventually put on a smile. "But the thing about mistakes is, yes, they can make you feel terrible, and for good reason. Yes, they may harm whatever bond you've made with others, and yes, you may spend the rest of your life regretting that you ever took an action like that. Yet at the same time, there is value in having done it." When she saw the confusion they all expressed, she carried on. "Mistakes are lessons. They are teachers. Perhaps the best you'll ever have. You'll look back on errors you've done, the missteps in your life, and you know perhaps forever that you shouldn't do it. Lying to a friend, treating them poorly. These things, and more, are things you'll remember. They're the scars in your memory. The scars are reminders. Reminders to never again do whatever it is you did that causes injury." Here, understanding came from the youths, and some even started writing notes about this, much to Starlight's delight. Mistakes hurt, both us and those we made them with, but they also help. They stay with us, whispering to us about what was right to do and what was wrong. They are stepping stones on the path to being a better person and a better friend. She leaned forward slightly. "We might admire the idea of a life without ever done anything wrong, but a life like that is a life where we've learned nothing at all." They were strong words, and they immediately got the room talking, as various groups of students began to look to one another and whisper about all sorts of things, like some small mistakes they themselves had made when being around whatever their particular circle of friends were. Starlight knew in this moment that their lesson had stuck, and as she looked once more to the side, seeing the smiling faces of her friends, she knew in her heart that she had done well here today. And so, after clearing her throat and gaining her class's attention yet again, she spoke loudly and clearly. "Alright then, as your first assignment this year, I'd like you to talk about mistakes you've made, and how you're all better for having learned from them." And that was Starlight's lesson. Admittedly, I quite like this one. It's short, sweet, and I can so see Starlight doing it. Definitely. I hope you all enjoyed, and, as always, keep watching that moon. And a howling thank you to my Patreons.